So, welcome to the Week 6 Hangout in Data Analytics and Learning. I'm Ryan Baker and am joined by George Dragon Carolyn and also by Virtual Carolyn. It's been an interesting week this week. There's been a lot of good activity on the forums. I was just taking another look right now. And we are going to, in this Hangout, chat about stuff we've learned this week. And stuff we're going to learn in the future, hopefully, and some of the things we're seeing. So let me start by apologizing for the weird logistic regression bug. I'm still not sure why every single person, including me on different computers, got different results for logistic regression. But if you're struggling with it, you can go to the forums and see what the answer to that question should have been, which nobody got, except for one computer with me. I know that there's been a lot of comments on the forums on the different assignments, the CTAP-based assignments. You know, we're trying out a lot of things here. And one of the things we were trying with the walkthroughs and the activities was to create a more step-by-step learning experience, more like a traditional intelligent tutor, than you get in the kind of quizzes you often see in MOOCs. I know some people were happy about that. Some people were less happy. People wanted a back button. We'll do that next time. And some people wanted to see the overview, which was more doable for the walkthrough than the activities, because the activities have questions like, based on what you learned in the last one, you can see that blah, blah, blah. Therefore, makes it hard to show the future. We were having a nice vigorous discussion before we came on air, which George reminded me that we should try to discuss some of these issues in front of you guys as well. But one of the things we talked about was, should there be a hint button? I didn't actually build hints into the activities, the step-by-step activities, in part because I thought the forums would be a good substitute for that. And we certainly have had really good discussion on the forums. I guess one of the things that I figure we'll kind of do the record keeping and the kind of bureaucratic stuff first. So we're kind of wrapping up the section on behavior detection. All the videos should be up. See what you think. Post the forums, ask questions, and start thinking about preparing for next week. And for that, I'll pass over to Carolyn to say a few things.
Great. Yes, I'm excited that next week we'll start the text mining unit. And so there will be several short lectures, some of which will cover research topics. Others will cover working with the tool called Lightside. I would suggest that students start to download Lightside now, just so that they can make sure that they can get it running properly on their computer. On many computers, it just works right out of the box. If you have any issues, you can just post, preferably through Quick Helper, to the discussion forums, and somebody will come and help you as quickly as possible.
So, and I'd actually like to ask Carolyn another question, which is about some of your recent awesome research, which in fact, I just looked at the forums, and people have been asking about that research, asking about some of that stuff just in the last few minutes.
Yeah, in fact, I saw a post on the discussion forum. A student was asking in particular about survival modeling, and that's a technique that we use frequently in our research here to try to study factors that are associated with dropout in MOOCs. And we wanted to see how much it was affecting students' commitment to the course when they had some intensive social interaction through the chats. So we recently ran a survival model over data from the first few weeks of the course, and we divided the days into 2-day periods of time. And so in each period of time, we looked at how many times students made an attempt to get connected in the chat, whether in fact they got connected in the chat, and the connection between those two variables. And we used as control variables also how many times students just viewed the forums and how many times students viewed videos. And what we found is that all these variables had either a significant or marginal effect. They were all significant except for the interaction term, which was marginal. And we don't see a huge effect of how many times students are clicking on videos or viewing the discussion forums, but we also don't see a lot of variance in that. So students are usually either doing everything or they're not really participating. But in terms of participating in the chats, we saw that students who clicked many times to get connected, there was a negative effect on their commitment to the course, so probably because students were getting frustrated with clicking so many times, but there was a positive effect of having been matched, which is actually 50%, which means that the dropout rate is being cut by 50% for students who participate in chats, controlling for the other factors. So that's a positive thing. And then when you look at the interaction term, you see an even greater effect. So as students click more to get connected, it appears that they benefit more from having been connected. So that's exciting to us. We're happy to see that there seems to be some real positive benefit to being involved in the chats. And as we've looked at the chats, we've also been very happy with them, just in terms of the level of reflection that we're seeing, and that the students really seem to be enjoying getting to know other students from the class, and have expressed a lot of interest in continuing to be connected. And we're reading these chats with the idea of thinking about affordances we might build into courses going forward. I'd like to point out that actually we're partnering with edX to get together a working group of people across institutions who are interested in these issues so that we can get more voices together to think about what we might offer and to build out the platform to make it easier for course instructors to be able to add activities like this, especially now that we have some quantitative evidence that it seems to be having an impact on something that's been a huge problem, and that is the dropout rate. But we've also seen just one more interesting piece of research. We were looking at the trend for usage of Quick Helper over time, and it seems to be increasing. So we're happy to see that the proportion of threads that are posted through Quick Helper is increasing, and I think it's because now there are many more students who are involved in answering each other's questions. That has increased, at least in my perception, over the course of the evolution in this class, and I'm really happy to see how actively students have been jumping in to answer each other's questions. We haven't done the analysis yet to see how many of those answers from students are in response to the emails that the Quick Helper sends out, but we're just about to do that analysis. So back to you, Ryan. I'm sorry for blabbing on. I'm just excited.
Carolyn, can I just jump in here, Ryan, just with a quick question for Carolyn, because I think it's interesting for me, but also I think it may be interesting also for students. In this case, when you applied survival analysis, what did you use, Carolyn, as the outcome or dependent variable? How did you actually compute the variable?
Oh, okay. So what we did was we have a drop variable. It's a binary variable. So actually I should specify that our survival modeling technique is a specific form where each instance is a time window. So for the same student, we have multiple observations instead of having one observation per student that's how long they participated. And the reason why we do it this way is because what we want to know is what are the effects of things that happen during time windows. So not just, we don't think that, you know, some kind of experience or variable about the student has a persistent effect over time, consistent across time windows, although there could be those things too, but what we're really interested in are those things that happen periodically that could have a local effect on how vulnerable a student is to drop out. So each instance is a time window. The drop variable says, is this the last active time window for the student? So, and the way that we compute that is we just look to see, is there a subsequent time window when we see some behavior in the MOOC that was recorded in the logs for the student? And if there's not, then we consider that that student dropped out. So obviously for the very last time window, we can't really know, so then we don't we're not using the last time window so that we can have something to look forward to see. Do I see more activity from the student in the future? So, so that's how it's set up, and of course there are lots of different ways of computing that, but that in this particular analysis, that's how we're doing it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Caroline. That's a really interesting approach. I think it's a very useful approach to do these types of things. But on the other hand, also kind of relates to the challenges of the context, right, in which these types of models are being built, right? In this particular case, you need to really define an operationalized definition of the output variable. And different contexts may require different operationalizations of this variable. And I'm sure while there are some students maybe that are presently considered dropout, maybe they didn't have any activity in the last couple of weeks, they may become active.
They could come back. That's
exactly
true.
Yeah, and so that's basically the survival model. It's a really good cross-cutting result for this point in time, but doesn't mean that some of these students that are presently defined as those who decided to drop out from the course maybe eventually be dropouts.
Oh yeah, yeah. So these are questions that we have thought about a lot, not only in the context of MOOCs, but also other kinds of online communities where we've done these kinds of analyses. And sometimes what we've done is have thought about dropping out, not a permanent dropout, but becoming inactive for a certain period of time. So then we could consider that one person might have multiple participation trajectories over the whole history of their involvement in a particular forum. And so then what we would be evaluating is not factors and how they affect dropout permanently, but just affect becoming inactive for some period of time.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sure, Carolyn, you put a lot of thought in that. And I mean, from the perspective of more accounting for context and sense making of these types of models, I think that's really essential. For example, if we are running these types of analysis in a conventional university-based course, where students are supposed to take their course within the period of 12 weeks, then some of these analyses may have different type of meaning. And basically,
absolutely.
And if students, for example, are inactive for 3 weeks in a 12 weeks long course at CMU, I'm sure they will be probably in a bit of a trouble. And similar happens in most of other universities. While in MOOCs, given the nature of the open nature and the lifelong learning preference of the participants that are taking these types of courses, then these types of models may have a different types of interpretation and require different types of operationalizations of the outcome variables. And I think that nicely taps into the topic of this week.
Oh yeah, and actually that reminds me to just say again to students that I encourage students not to feel like they have to stay in lockstep. So I was extremely pleased to see a bunch of posts very recently from students who have just joined the course now, and I think that's great. And it's great that it's open and the resources are there, and I think no one should feel like they really have to start at the beginning and do everything. You can really sample around and pick those things that are interesting to you, and in some ways the material builds. I would say that there are things that we'll do in the text unit that really build strongly on what Ryan has taught in this unit, and yet if there are things that students struggled with in this unit, I think that won't be a problem for them in the text unit. It's just that the extent to which you understand something from the concepts that Ryan has taught in this unit, the work that we'll do in the text unit will be more meaningful to you. So, but I think that actually there's kind of a loose connection between the units in this course where they're all important areas of learning analytics, and yet if you have trouble with one part, it doesn't mean that you won't be able to get something out of the next part. So I think I really encourage students to just feel good about participating in this community, feel welcome to come in and experience what's useful to you, and do it at your own pace.
And that's a great point. Yeah, sorry, Ryan. I was anyways going to turn a question over to you as well, because some of these questions that Carolyn and I just touched on related to defining the outcome variable, etc. They are, I think, nicely tapping into the topic that you are covering in this week, ground truth, right? And the challenges that may be associated with ground truth. So I'm sure you have plenty of experience there to share. I'm pretty sure that students will also appreciate to get some additional insights, especially in relation to the conversation Carolyn and I just had.
Sure. Well, let me start by just making a quick comment on what Carolyn said a second ago. I think one of the other great things that we've been seeing on the forums and also on DALMOOC on Facebook is people bringing in other resources, which is great. Some people, for example, in a discussion on DALMOOC a few days ago, we're kind of confused about what regressors and classifiers are. And one student said, had some comments on it, and another person kind of brought in some resources, and I thought it was really nice. You're not limited to what's in this course. This course, we're doing our best to kind of get you a set of experiences that are building in difficulty. So a lot of people talk about this week the last 2 weeks got a little harder. It didn't kind of get all the details out as much, and that's because it's kind of moving a little faster. But now let me jump to what you were asking, Dragon. I mean, I think that defining ground truth is always the fun and interesting and hard part of classifiers and regressors and supervised learning and machine learning in general. If you do a method like clustering, you don't need to know what you're looking for to begin with. But if you do a method like classifiers or regressors, you need to know what you're looking for. And it really matters how good the measures you have. In the lectures, we talked about, for example, ground truth for things like behavior detection. But it's always a challenge. And I think actually one of the ways that learning analytics, educational data mining, really kind of differs from some of the other analytics domains is that in a lot of other analytics domains, you have good measures already of the ground truth that you want. If you want to know who is going to rent a video, or if you want to know who is going to default on their loan, you have a good natural measure already sitting there. With education, there are a few natural measures like that, like dropping out of a course, but even dropout becomes a complicated thing in MOOCs. Do we even care if somebody doesn't finish all the assignments if they learn everything, or if they learn one thing that really matters? I think that figuring out how to operationalize your ground truth and how to find it, how to harvest it, is one of the really fun challenges. And certainly something I've been working hard on. I know something that other folks in this room have also worked hard on. Carolyn, with some of your stuff over the years about trying to define what are the categories that the human beings are seeing in the text. Or, for example, Shane Dawson's work that we've talked about earlier in the class with looking at medical students and trying to find measures that that connect to meaningful things about not just their participation in the social network, but what that connects to other stuff. I don't know if that answered your question, Dragon, but I sure felt good in rambling.
No, it was a great insight, Ryan. Thanks for saying that. And I mean, when mentioning Shane Dawson and the other topics that we discussed here, that reminded me of social network analysis. And it reminded me basically that's something that I always appreciate if we can connect basically previous lessons that we learned in some of the previous weeks with the weeks that we are presently covering. And one of the things that probably many students already have a pretty good idea is that, for example, social network position that we computed in weeks 3 and 4, they could be also potentially good predictors that can be incorporated into some of the regressors that we are studying in this sort of next week. For example, some of the notions that Carolyn also discussed about, for example, like students like to connect with others, students are really getting positive experience, etc. That nicely actually connects with the research in social network analysis, but also in general education and research, where social integration, according, for example, to Vincent Tinto's theory, is the strongest predictor of student retention, right? And some additional research which also talks about connection between, for example, social network position and, for example, academic success. Even throughout weeks 3 and 4, when we talked about, especially in week 4, when we talk association of network position with different educational measures, we always talked about different types of associations. In many cases, we actually even reported results on regression models. In most of these studies, we actually looked into linear regressions, which are looking actually into the association between a set of predictors and a continuous variable, while in this and the past week, we mainly focused on the categorical variables as the outcome variables, if I'm not mistaken, Ryan.
The lectures talked a little more about the regression, but the assignments were much more in the classification space.
Yeah,
on the regression.
right. But Yeah, yeah. And so that's all what I wanted to say is basically all these variables that we potentially computed in weeks 3 and 4, but even in weeks 1 and 2, they could be all entered into the feature space that can then be leveraged for the classification types of problems that we are trying to solve in this week, or into the regression models that are being taught. And I'm sure Caroline will also be talking about additional types of variables that can be entered into these types of regression models, except that in her case, those types of variables will be a representation of the textual space that students are generating while they are, for example, discussing or when they are reading some text.
Yeah, it raises a very interesting question, though, Dragon, and that is whether the social integration that you see with students is really a reflection of a commitment that they already have made to the community before they got connected, because it took some effort. And so it could be that the other things that are associated with it are also stemming from that. They were committed, so they got integrated, but they also worked hard, and they also stuck with it, and they also then learned a lot. Because as we have been doing our analyses, we have also seen in the past that students who were better connected in the social network of the discussion forums had way less dropout. I mean, huge effects, bigger than almost any other variables that we've looked at so far. And we, at first we're really excited about that because we believe in social integration and social interaction and its positive effects, but we wondered how much of it is really just a reflection of the commitment that the students already came in with. And I wonder, in this work that you have cited, have they made an effort to try to tease those things apart, and what do you think about that?
That's a great.
In there for a second, Caroline. Just pass over to Dragon regarding, because Tinto had two particular areas of integration. One was academic integration, and the second was social integration with an organization or with a university system. But just the point that you were mentioning regarding things that we really can't get at with learning analytics sometimes, and that's what you were just referencing, is some of the affective and the metacognitive dimensions of learning are tough to get at with some of the things that we're currently looking at. And I know Ryan's done a fair bit of work around trying to identify affective attributes, but the term of perseverance, or grit as it's sometimes called, I mean, what is that? I mean, is it the grit, the ability to persevere as a student, that determines that you will eventually form tightly clustered networks? Or is it someone who tries the bizarre session once and can't get connected with someone and then says, well, screw that, I won't bother again? Or somebody who keeps trying and eventually gets connected and has those social outcomes. So I think as we're talking about the broader view of analytics, it's important that we have this focus that there's a range of things that we can't quite get at yet, at least not as meaningfully as we'd like to do in order to have a fair degree of confidence in it. Anyway, sorry, over to you, Dragon, the questions that Karen was asking.
No, thanks, George. Those are some really important points that you are making there, especially with respect to the types of data that we can extract from trace data that are being logged by learning management systems. On the other hand, I think the point that Caroline was also making was related to causality. And in many cases, with these types of models, we really don't and are unable to say what was the cause. All we can infer from all these models is that there is an association between a certain set of variables or features or as predictors and a certain outcome. Whether some of these features are the cause or not, we don't know. For example, Caroline rose a really important point about, for example, whether there was like a prior commitment of students or it was something that was developed throughout the course. We cannot know that without collecting additional types of data, I'm pretty sure. And in many cases, I mean, and I think that's another important point about sense-making process of learning analytics is, in many cases, you may get some of these types of models, and eventually you may mix them with some qualitative studies. For example, going and interview certain students that are fitting into particular types of models. In other cases, in other studies, we may decide to administer certain questionnaires. That was the reason, for example, why we administered certain questionnaires in the beginning of this course. And Ryan can tell probably more about some of these questionnaires and potentially some of the questions that he and his team had in mind when they administered and created those questionnaires.
Certainly. I mean, I think there's a lot of issues we're interested in. We keep finding new issues to be interested in with these questionnaires. There's so many dimensions to student motivation that matters. You know, we really thought when we first started looking at that, and we haven't really analyzed the data from this MOOC yet. We're kind of waiting to see the rest of the course, but we really thought that performance and mastery goals, which have a long and rich history in in education research, were going to be really important. Turned out, everybody in a MOOC kind of has mastery goals just about. Not quite everybody, but it's really pretty dominant, and there wasn't as much variance as we were really hoping for or expecting to see. Some of the biggest predictors of who completed the MOOC in the previous MOOC we studied were things like whether people had high self-efficacy, which is another common construct. People who thought they were likely to complete the MOOC were likely to complete the MOOC. So, but there's kind of a tautological aspect to that too, but it shows that there's something interesting going on. I think the sky's still the limit for what we can kind of learn from these questionnaires. And I know, Dragon, that you added a couple items as well that I think are pretty fun that just escaped my mind. What were they on again?
They were related to grit. And we basically are interested, but we haven't really done any analysis with grit yet, so I can't comment on that yet, although there were some studies done in the past that are talking about general retention of students with the higher levels of grit, and there is a significant association between those. So we would suspect that, but I would on the other hand also kind of suspect that the results will eventually be normalized as well in MOOCs, given that most of students who survived the entire MOOC, they will pretty much have the higher level of grit in any case, and probably the variability between them will be relatively low. We also, Ryan, with respect to these achievement goal orientation, you mentioned performance and mastery goal orientations. We also did it even in conventional MOOCs when we tried to kind of cluster students based on achievement goal orientations. And in most of cases, we actually find that task very challenging, and we don't really typically get very meaningful interpretations of those clusters at all. What we are typically finding meaningful interpretation for is typically approaches to learning, where we are talking basically more conceptual approaches to learning, where students are interested to conceptually change and deeply engage into some learning, and more kind of superficial approaches to learning, where students are just interested to pick up certain facts. That's something what we are observing, that there is at least producing some meaningful differences in the regular online and even the blended learning context, but we haven't done that type of research in the MOOC context.
It's very cool, and I want to add one other thing, which is that grit measures actually tend to be pretty good predictors, well, reasonably good predictors of disengaged behaviors in blended learning. It's actually one of the few things that's predictive of disengaged behaviors in online learning. Traditional survey measures of motivation typically don't predict enacted engagement. That's one of the I think that's actually an interesting thing about log analysis, to kind of get at those enacted measures of engagement. But it is interesting that aside from grit, the only thing that really predicts in blended learning from traditional survey measures is attitudes towards the domain or towards the course itself, which is in some ways much more obvious than grit. If you hate math, you're probably going to disengage in math. But grit itself, I think, is a little more interesting. So I think it's great that we're moving towards adding that. I'm looking forward to seeing how gritty our students are and what grit measures can predict.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ryan.
And to pick up on that a little bit, I think an important aspect there, which we haven't necessarily looked at, and I was briefly talked about when Dragon was mentioning how some of the work in social network analysis that was done in weeks 3 and 4 related to the kinds of activities that we've been looking at over weeks 5 and 6. But I think it's this sense of educationally, especially with educational research, we're always facing this challenge of we're dealing with the holistic social system that isn't reducible to a set of parts or even a set of individual relationships, and recognizing that there are a growing amount of variables that come into play, and eventually spending some time thinking about how do you piece those variables together, I should say, to make it something more holistic. It's sort of a critical challenge that with learning analytics, at some point at least, you have to pay attention to that dimension of it.
So let me open up for a second and just point out that while we're chatting here, and we are glad that you enjoy our chat, if anyone wants to ask a question of us, I am monitoring the Twitter feeds. I haven't seen any questions on the Twitter feed or the Facebook feed. Actually, the only thing that's happened the last half hour is that the Electronic Dance Music New York has followed me. Another DM apparently. But sorry, I totally killed conversation, didn't I?
No, but I think, Ryan, we are anyways getting to the 30-minute count that we have allocated
Right,
for.
Well, in that case, let me say that if you have questions, post on the forum or come to next week's Hangout. It's been fun hanging out with my cool instructors. It's been fun hanging out with all of you, and I hope you all have, if you celebrate American Thanksgiving, I hope you have a great American Thanksgiving, and if you don't, I hope you have a great Thursday and Friday.
All right, thanks a lot, Ryan. Happy Thanksgiving to the American colleagues.
Thank you.
Thanks. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Alrighty, well, have a good one, everybody.